The sun was already slipping beneath the horizon as they drove down the narrow, winding road that led to the Black Lake. The trees leaned over like twisted sentinels, their gnarled branches clawing at the last remnants of daylight. A chill had settled in the air, though it wasn't the kind that came with autumn. It was heavier, deeper, almost alive. As they approached the lake, a low mist hugged the water's surface. It seemed to breathe, rolling and curling like smoke from some ancient fire. The road ended abruptly at a small clearing, where the water stretched dark and still, reflecting the blood-red streaks of the fading sky. No birds sang here. No insects buzzed. Only silence. And beneath that silence, if you listened carefully, there was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper, like a voice carried across the water. They stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched beneath their feet, loud in the oppressive quiet. The closer they drew to the lake, the stronger the sensation grew, as though the lake itself were aware of them, watching, waiting. One of them, Sarah, shivered. "It's beautiful," she said softly, though her voice betrayed unease. The others nodded, but even they couldn't hide the tightness in their jaws. The lake had an unnatural stillness. Its surface was like glass, but it didn't reflect the forest or the sky properly. Only shadows. Shapes that seemed to move beneath the black surface. "Let's just set up camp here," Mark said. His tone was casual, but there was a tremor he tried to hide. He pulled a flashlight from his bag. The beam cut through the mist, revealing strange, twisted trees that lined the far edge of the lake, black and gnarled, like something that had grown in defiance of nature itself. The wind rose suddenly, and with it came a sound, a low, guttural hum, almost a chant. No one spoke, they only listened. It was faint, distant, but it was coming from the lake. The water rippled slightly, though no stone or creature had disturbed it. And then, almost imperceptibly, it whispered a name. Sarah. Her head jerked toward the water, eyes wide. "Who's there?" she called, her voice quivering. But no one answered. Only the wind and the water and the voices beneath the black lake. As night fell fully, the mist thickened, curling around their legs and their camp. Shadows moved where there should have been none. And when they finally sat around the fire, hoping the warmth and light would keep the unease at bay, Mark noticed something in the water. A faint shimmer, like someone, or something, was watching them from beneath. And that was only the beginning. The night had settled over the black lake like a living, breathing thing. Mist rolled across the water in curling fingers, thick and cold, swallowing the faint light of their campfire. Every breath they took seemed to mingle with it, vanish and return, heavier, colder, and somehow watching. Then the whispers began. At first they were faint, like the sound of the wind passing through hollow reeds, distant and indecipherable. But as the campers strained to listen, the words grew clearer. Sarah. Mark. They came alone. The names were drawn out, warped and twisted, stretched by something that was not human. Sarah's hand trembled as she clutched her jacket tighter around herself. Did you hear that?" she whispered, voice trembling. Mark shone his flashlight across the dark water. The beam barely pierced the mist, revealing only shadows that seemed to twist and bend just beyond the light. "It's just the wind," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The whispers persisted, now more insistent, more personal. "You lied," she betrayed. "You cannot escape." The mist thickened, wrapping around their legs like living smoke. Each step toward the lake felt heavier, as though the earth itself resisted their presence. And then shapes began to move beneath the surface, dark, elongated, impossible forms that shimmered just out of clarity. Sarah's stomach tightened, a cold, crawling fear that no warmth could shake. Shadows flickered at the edge of the flashlight beam, and each time Mark blinked, they were gone. Only the whispering remained, insistent, omnipresent. Hours passed. The lake remained still, yet alive, breathing in sync with their own racing hearts. The whispers evolved, no longer simply calling names but speaking secrets, sins, fears, and unspoken guilt. "She hid it. He took it. They will fall." The campers froze with every word. Paranoia settled in like a second skin. Each glance revealed subtle distortions, the branches bending impossibly, reflections in the water that did not match reality, eyes glowing faintly in the mist. Sarah pressed her hands over her ears. "Stop it. Please, stop," she begged. But the whispers only grew louder, now overlapping, forming a chaotic chorus that echoed around them. The wind rose as if in response, curling the mist, carrying the voices further and closer at the same time. Each camper began to hear things the others didn't: a faint laugh, a whispered accusation, a name carried on the wind. The lake was aware. Every attempt to flee was met with resistance. Ripples spread unnaturally, water moved against gravity, shadows slithered toward them. Objects in their camp shifted subtly, sticks moved, the tent flap twitched, the bag slid a few inches. Their fear compounded. Each heartbeat seemed synchronized with the lake itself, as if it were counting, anticipating, learning. By the second hour, the whispers were coherent, personal, horrifyingly so. The lake repeated their secrets aloud. Faces beneath the water shimmered, skeletal, drowned, distorted. The mist thickened to the point where the flashlight barely illuminated the ground before them. The air was electric, charged with anticipation, a low hum vibrating through the soil and water alike. Mark tried to organize the group, voice trembling. "We need to leave. Now. Move." But panic had paralyzed them. Paranoia twisted their perception. Every shadow was a threat, every ripple in the water a signal of something lurking just out of sight. One by one, the campers questioned their own senses. Was that a hand? Was that reflection theirs? Or something else imitating them? The whispers escalated into a chilling chant, layered, hypnotic, impossible to ignore. "Come, join us, beneath." Each syllable struck like ice in their veins. Sarah screamed as a skeletal hand broke the surface of the water, impossibly long, reaching toward her. Mark lunged, grabbed her, but the mist thickened around his legs, holding him, dragging him closer to the water's edge. The chanting intensified, voices overlapping, drowning out rational thought, replacing it with raw, visceral terror. By the third hour, the lake's intent was undeniable. The whispers now merged into a singular voice, a chorus of drowned souls, calling each camper by name, accusing, commanding. Shapes beneath the water solidified into visions of the dead. Faces, hands, shadows, all reaching, clawing, whispering, pleading, and threatening simultaneously. The campers' attempts to escape were futile. The very ground beneath them seemed to resist, bending reality to the lake's will. Suddenly, one of them vanished. No scream, no splash, nothing but silence. The mist swallowed the spot where they had stood. Only the whispers remained. "Another has joined us." Sarah and Mark stared at each other, wide-eyed, hearts hammering in unison. The realization sank in: the lake was not merely haunted. It was alive. Remembered. It fed on fear, and it would not let them leave. The whispers grew louder, rising into a crescendo that seemed to shake the mist, the water, even the trees themselves. They had crossed into a domain where reality bent, fear ruled, and survival was a fragile, fleeting illusion. As the night dragged on, every sense was heightened. The slightest sound, the faintest shadow, the smallest ripple became a source of terror. And all the while, the whispers continued, naming secrets, sins, and fears with intimate precision. The campers could not sleep. They could not think. They could not escape. The Black Lake was patient. And it was hungry. By the end of the night, Sarah and Mark understood the unthinkable truth. There would be no rescue. The lake had claimed one, and it would claim them all. The whispers promised it, the shadows hinted at it, and the water waited, dark, eternal, and alive. And then, just as the first faint glow of dawn threatened the horizon, a ripple moved across the lake, deliberate, ominous, a reminder that the Black Lake's horror had only begun. The Black Lake had not slept, and neither had its victims. The fog hung heavier than ever, curling in twisting patterns over the water, thick enough to obscure anything beneath. Every sound, the soft lapping of water, the rustle of branches, the faint snap of a twig, carried weight, meaning, and warning. Mark and Sarah had spent what felt like hours in silence, the only sounds their ragged breathing and the occasional whisper carried across the lake. The whispers were louder now, persistent, deliberate. They spoke not only of names and sins but of futures. They will fall, one will vanish, the darkness waits. The first sign of trouble came subtly, almost innocuously. A fishing rod, left by the shore, toppled over as though nudged by an unseen hand. Sarah froze, eyes wide, clutching her jacket. Mark strained to see into the fog, but the beam of his flashlight barely penetrated the mist. "It's just the wind," he whispered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Minutes passed. The whispers grew more insistent, shaping into coherent words that no human should know. You cannot escape. He waits beneath. Sarah's gaze darted across the water. Ripples formed in impossible patterns, spiraling outward like black smoke. Then a shape, pale, glistening, elongated, surfaced briefly, only to vanish as if the water had swallowed it again. And then the scream came. It was short, strangled, almost internal, but it shattered the night. Mark turned. Sarah had vanished. Her jacket lay in the mist, damp and folded unnaturally as though someone, or something, had set it down. Mark ran forward, calling her name, but the fog seemed to thicken in response, coiling around him like living chains. The whispers became louder, almost mocking, repeating, "Another has joined us." Hours dragged on. Mark stumbled along the shore, flashlight trembling in his grip, encountering impossible horrors with each step. Reflections in the water moved independently, sometimes mimicking him, sometimes twisting into grotesque shapes, whispering secrets he had never spoken aloud. Shadows flickered at impossible angles, creating the illusion of dozens of figures in the mist. Every attempt to look away brought a new horror. Hands, pale and skeletal, rose from the water, only partially visible, as if testing the boundary between the lake and reality. Faces of the drowned swam just beneath the surface, hollow eyes fixed on him with a gaze that penetrated his soul. By the second hour, Mark's mind had begun to fracture. The lake had begun to communicate in a rhythm he could feel in his chest, pulse in sync with his heartbeat. Every whisper repeated his fears back to him. You will fail. You cannot save her. You are alone. Mark tried to call for help, his voice weak against the oppressive fog. Shadows twisted around him in impossible ways. Trees bent unnaturally, roots crept along the ground like fingers, and the mist carried distorted echoes of past victims. He stumbled over a rock, falling into the shallow edge of the lake, and for a fleeting moment, he saw Sarah beneath the surface, reaching upward with hollow eyes, mouth opening in a silent scream. Then she was gone. The third hour brought the lake fully alive. The whispers were a chorus now, chanting, demanding, instructing. Every ripple in the water, every flicker of mist, every shadow had intent. The lake was not a body of water, it was a predator, patient and intelligent. It claimed what it wanted, shaping reality to its desire. Mark realized the truth. The lake had marked them. One had vanished and he would be next. Each step he took was calculated by the lake, every move anticipated. The air vibrated with the whispers, now forming words in perfect clarity. Join, join, join. Desperate, he tried to leave the lake, only to find the shore had stretched impossibly, the fog folding over itself like a living maze. Every path led back to the same dark water, the same shadows, the same whispers. And from beneath the surface, pale, skeletal hands reached, twisting and stretching in impossible angles, beckoning. As the first light of dawn struggled against the heavy fog, Mark stumbled back to where he had first seen Sarah vanish. There was no trace of her, no sound, only the lake itself, still and black, hiding its secrets. The whispers persisted, soft now, almost satisfied. Another has joined us. By the end of the night, Mark understood the unthinkable. The lake did not merely take bodies. It consumed souls, rewriting reality around itself, learning, adapting, preparing for the next victim. The first disappearance was only the beginning, a warning, a promise. And somewhere beneath the black water, a presence watched, patient and eternal, waiting for the next step, the next heartbeat, the next life to claim. The dawn that had promised relief never arrived. The black lake was a world unto itself, untouched by time, untethered from reason. Mist coiled over the water, thicker now, twisting into shapes that seemed to breathe. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching toward the forest, toward the campers, toward Mark, who alone now staggered along the shore. The whispers returned, not soft this time, but insistent, commanding. You cannot leave. You cannot hide. We are everywhere. Each syllable vibrated through the air, through his bones, through his blood. His heartbeat raced in response, but the whispers matched it, in perfect rhythm, anticipating, mocking. Every step he took seemed guided by some invisible hand. The ground beneath him warped subtly, roots curling to trip him, the mist thickening to hide shapes moving just beyond vision. And in the water, shapes pulsed. Faces, distorted and drowned, flickered beneath the black surface. mouths opening in silent screams that somehow echoed in his ears. Hours passed, though he could not tell if it was morning or night. Time had no meaning here. The fog carried distant, haunting cries, sometimes his own name, sometimes that of Sarah, sometimes names he did not recognize, names of those the lake had already claimed. The whispers converged into chants, low and guttural, almost intelligible, almost understandable, promising doom, promising pain, promising eternal watching. Mark stumbled across the shoreline and the lake reacted. Ripples spread toward him, though no wind had stirred. Shapes beneath the surface twisted and writhed, forming humanoid figures and then dissolving into shadow. A skeletal hand rose briefly from the water, fingers reaching, curling, beckoning. He ran. The fog shifted, twisting to block his path, roots grabbing at his feet, mud pulling him downward as if the lake itself sought to claim him. In the trees, shadows moved independently of the branches, stretching and contracting in impossible ways. Eyes glowed faintly in the mist, pale and hollow, watching him, whispering secrets, mocking him. Every reflection in the water was distorted, showing him images of death, decay, drowning, and despair. Every sound, a splash, a rustle, a whisper, carried meaning, warning, promise of terror. Hours stretched into eternity. Mark's mind began to fracture. He saw Sarah beneath the water, then his reflection twisting into the visage of the drowned. The whispers became a choir. Join us, forever, beneath, beneath. He could not think, could not reason, could not escape the constant, creeping dread. By the second hour, the lake's power revealed itself more fully. The whispers now spoke of futures, of inevitable doom. You will fall, another will vanish. The lake is hungry. Shapes began to form above the water, like shadows reaching for the sky, faces pale, hands skeletal, eyes hollow and infinite. A sudden scream split the air, echoing and ricocheting from the mist, though no one appeared. The sound vibrated in Mark's chest, rattling his very bones. He tried to flee. The forest, the shore, even the ground itself bent against him. The mist thickened to a wall, and from its depths rose forms, not entirely human, not entirely water, not entirely shadow. They reached, twisting, stretching, beckoning. The whispers overlapped, repeating secrets, sins, fears, every thought he had tried to hide, every regret he had buried. By the third hour, the lake had consumed the environment entirely. Time, space, reality were bent around it. Shadows merged with mist, shapes pulsed beneath the water, whispers became commands, threats, and promises. Mark's senses were assaulted. The smell of decay, the cold that penetrated bone, the whispers that seemed to speak from inside his head. He saw countless figures beneath the black surface, drowned and distorted, all reaching, all waiting. And then he realized, the first disappearance was only the beginning. The lake did not just take. It learned, it hunted, it shaped reality around those it intended to claim. The whispers told him what he already knew. Escape was impossible. Resistance was meaningless. The black lake was eternal and it was patient. He stumbled to the edge, desperately searching for Sarah, for any sign of life, but the lake remained black, still, impenetrable. And from the depths, a single ripple spread outward, slow, deliberate, promising the next horror, the next victim, the next claim. The whispers crescendoed into a choir of death. Another will join us. Mark's scream was swallowed by the fog. The black lake waited, eternal, patient, hungering, and the terror that had begun as whispers now rose to full, living horror. There would be no dawn. There would be no rescue. Only the rising terror, relentless, eternal, and all-consuming. The mist hung over the black lake like a suffocating shroud, thicker than ever, twisting and curling in shapes that seemed to move of their own volition. Each step along the shore was uncertain. The mud clung to their boots as if reluctant to let them move forward. Mark and Sarah, both exhausted and terrified, knew something was coming, something beyond comprehension, beyond escape. Hours ago they had discovered the warning, a tattered diary half buried in the mud, its pages damp and curling, its words scrawled in a frantic hand. Do not linger. Do not speak their names. The lake remembers. The lake hungers. Ignore it at your peril. They had read it, understood it, and yet, they had ignored it. Ignorance was not bliss here, it was a curse. The whispers returned, louder now, sharper, more insistent. You ignored the warning, you cannot leave, join us. Each syllable seemed to pierce the air, the fog, and their minds. Shadows twisted in impossible ways, reaching toward them, flickering in and out of existence. Every reflection in the water was distorted, not their own, but twisted visages of the drowned, staring with hollow eyes, mouths opening in silent screams. Sarah shivered, clutching the diary. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered, voice breaking. But the lake had already decided. The fog thickened, curling around them like a living cage. Ripples spread across the black water with no wind, forming shapes that resembled hands, reaching, beckoning. The whispers were relentless. "Another will fall, another will vanish." Hours passed, time warped. The lake seemed to stretch, elongate, bend reality. Shadows became figures, figures became grotesque reflections of humanity, and every sound, a snap, a splash, a whisper, was a threat. Mark stumbled, tripping over a root that seemed to rise from nowhere, and fell hard, mud splattering across his face. A scream shattered the night. Not Sarah's. Not his own. Something different. Something inhuman. It echoed across the water, bouncing off the mist, carrying with it a promise of death. The whispers swelled into a cacophony. "You were warned, you were warned, you were warned." The diary trembled in Sarah's hands, pages flipping as if moved by invisible fingers. One page revealed a crude sketch, a figure rising from the water, elongated, skeletal, surrounded by smaller figures like shadows of the damned. The words beneath it: "The lake claims all who ignore the warning." Mark tried to reason, tried to escape, but the shore twisted impossibly. Paths he had walked before now led back to the same black water. The fog thickened into a wall, pulsating, almost alive. From its depths, shadows rose slowly, stretching, elongating, reaching for them. By the second hour, terror had fully consumed them. Every whisper was a scream, every shadow a threat, every ripple a hand reaching up from the lake. They began to hallucinate, glimpses of lost friends, faces of the drowned, distorted reflections mocking them. Reality itself had bent around the lake, and the warnings in the diary were no longer abstract. They were prophecy. The whispers began to chant. Names, sins, secrets, their deepest fears exposed. "You will fall, you cannot resist, join us beneath." Each word struck like ice, paralyzing, consuming, shaping their minds into submission. By the third hour, the lake's power was undeniable. It had claimed one before. It would claim more. Shadows from beneath the water rose fully now, skeletal hands clawing upward, faces of the drowned screaming silently, their eyes hollow, endless. Mark and Sarah stumbled backward, every instinct screaming to flee, yet the lake reshaped the shore, pulling them inexorably toward the water. The whispers intensified, overlapping into a single horrifying chorus. "You ignored the warning, now you belong to us." And as the fog thickened to suffocating density, a hand emerged from the water, skeletal, elongated, beckoning, almost human, almost dead. Sarah screamed as the mist swallowed her, her body dragged toward the lake with unnatural force. Mark tried to grab her, but the fog and water moved against him, as if reality itself conspired to claim them. By the end of the night, only silence remained. The whispers receded, leaving a hollow, suffocating calm. The diary lay open, pages fluttering, mocking. The warning had been ignored. The black lake had hungered, and it had claimed. And somewhere beneath the black water, shapes twisted and writhed, waiting patiently for the next soul foolish enough to ignore the warning, foolish enough to linger, foolish enough to hear the whispers and remain. The black lake was no longer merely a body of water. It had become a living entity, a reflection of fear itself, stretching reality and twisting perception. Mark stumbled along the fog-laden shore, each step heavier than the last. The mud clung to his boots, roots curled like serpents around his ankles, and the whispers never ceased. "You are alone, you cannot escape, the lake remembers." Hours passed without the relief of light. The fog thickened, curling into impossible shapes, almost human, almost alive, and the water shimmered with movements beneath its surface that were not natural. Mark's mind reeled. The lake had begun to show him visions, glimpses of its past victims. Faces distorted by death, screaming silently, hollow eyes staring through him, whispering secrets he had never spoken aloud. Sarah's disappearance haunted him with every step. He imagined her in the fog, calling, pleading, but the mist twisted her voice into something alien, mocking. The whispers were constant now, forming words, then phrases, then sentences. They came alone. They ignored the warning. Now they belong. As night deepened, Mark discovered objects half buried in the mud, remnants of previous visitors, torn clothing, journals, sketches, strange symbols etched into stones, all hinting at the lake's history. One sketch depicted the lake as a black maw, pulling figures beneath its surface, eyes staring up in eternal despair. Another journal described the whispers, how they could manipulate perception, bend reality, and drive even the strongest mind to madness. Mark realized the horrifying truth: the lake was intelligent. It observed, it learned, it shaped reality to claim its victims. And it had done this for centuries. The fog was no longer a natural mist. It was a living thing, guiding, separating, isolating. Every step he took seemed predetermined, every path leading closer to the lake's waiting hands. By the second hour, the whispers evolved further, no longer just personal but prophetic. They spoke of inevitability. One more will vanish. One more will join us. The lake hungers. You cannot resist. Mark's eyes were drawn to the water again and again. Shadows beneath the surface pulsed, forming shapes that were both human and monstrous. He saw hands reaching, faces screaming, bodies suspended in the water like dark marionettes. Time had lost meaning. The whispers now mocked him, repeating his own thoughts back to him in distorted echoes. Each ripple in the water was deliberate, a warning, a taunt. The trees bent unnaturally, branches curling like claws, roots reaching, the fog pulsating as if alive. Mark stumbled, heart hammering, and felt an almost magnetic pull toward the lake's edge. By the third hour, the mystery deepened further. Mark discovered a small clearing at the far edge of the lake, illuminated faintly by moonlight filtered through the thick mist. In the center lay a stone altar, slick with water and something darker. Strange symbols, etched deep and ancient, glowed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that echoed the lake's whispers. The water around the altar rippled unnaturally. Mark's reflection in the black surface was no longer his own. His face twisted, aged, drowned, eyes hollow. The whispers rose to a crescendo. You will join us. You are marked. There is no escape. From beneath the surface, hands emerged again, skeletal, elongated, beckoning. Faces of the drowned hovered just beneath, mouths open in silent screams. Mark's mind reeled with the revelation. The lake had claimed Sarah, countless others before, and now him. The warning had been ignored. The disappearance had already begun. Every instinct screamed to run, yet the lake had already claimed his reality. Shadows twisted, fog pulsed, ripples spread like veins through the black water, and the whispers promised inevitability. Deepen. You cannot resist. The lake remembers all. As the first faint light of dawn touched the mist, Mark realized that the black lake's horror was no longer just around him. It was inside him, shaping his thoughts, his fears, his perception of reality. He had come seeking answers, but the lake had only deepened the mystery. And somewhere, beneath the eternal black water, unseen eyes watched, waited, and hungered for the next heartbeat, the next victim, the next soul to vanish. The fog had become a living shroud, thick and suffocating, coiling around Mark's limbs, tugging him closer to the lake's black surface. Every step was uncertain, every sound amplified. The whispers, once distant and subtle, were now a chorus screaming directly into his mind. You cannot escape. You are ours. Join us beneath. He stumbled over roots, mud sucking at his boots, and his flashlight flickered, revealing shapes that shifted and writhed just beyond the light. Shadows moved independently, twisting into grotesque forms, and beneath the water, pale hands reached, clawing at the surface, beckoning. Mark's fear reached a new depth. This was no longer a test of courage. It was a confrontation with something utterly alien, something that had existed long before him, long before any human dared approach these cursed waters. Shapes emerged from the mist, humanoid, distorted, half shadow, half water, and their eyes, hollow and endless, fixed upon him. Hours passed, though he could not tell time. Every heartbeat matched the pulse of the lake, every breath mirrored in the whispering chorus. The unknown watches, the unknown waits, the unknown claims. He could see glimpses of Sarah beneath the water, suspended, reaching for him with hollow eyes, her screams swallowed by the black depths. Mark tried to fight, to resist. He shouted, he waved his flashlight, he ran, but the lake reshaped reality itself. The shore twisted, lengthened, the trees bending impossibly, roots curling like snakes to block his path. The whispers mocked him, repeating his own thoughts back to him. You cannot resist. You are alone. You are marked. By the second hour, the confrontation escalated. The water began to churn violently, ripples spreading unnaturally, forming shapes like massive hands, grasping at him from below. Shadows leaped from the mist, slamming into the ground, crawling toward him. The air vibrated with whispers, now chanting, now commanding, now promising pain, death, and surrender. Mark's mind began to fracture. Every reflection, every shadow, every ripple was a threat. He could not distinguish reality from illusion. He saw figures of the drowned rise from the lake, skeletal, twisted, with eyes that followed his every movement. Their mouths moved in silent chanting, voices carried in the whispers, "Join us, become one, the unknown waits." Desperate, he reached for the stone altar at the lake's far edge, remnants of ancient warnings carved into its surface. The symbols glowed faintly in the mist, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. But the lake responded. Ripples surged outward, fog thickened, and the skeletal hands from beneath reached higher, pulling at the very air around him. Hours stretched, the confrontation unrelenting. Mark realized that the lake's power was not just over the body but the mind. It invaded thoughts, reshaped perception, and manipulated fear itself. The whispers now spoke of inevitability. You will fall. The unknown claims all. Resistance is meaningless. By the third hour, the unknown revealed its full horror. Shapes coalesced above the water, tall, skeletal, half water, half shadow, with faces of the drowned and hollow, infinite eyes. They reached for Mark with impossible speed and strength, pulling at the fog, the ground, the very air, bending reality to claim him. He screamed as the mist wrapped around him like hands of ice, dragging him toward the black water. The whispers became a deafening chorus, overlapping every sound, repeating every fear, every thought, every secret. You are ours. The unknown will consume. Join us beneath. Mark's vision blurred. Time fractured. The fog, shadows, and water became one, an endless, all-consuming entity. Every instinct screamed to fight, but resistance was futile. The unknown had arrived, patient, eternal, hungry. As the night stretched endlessly, Mark realized the terrible truth. The confrontation was not about survival. It was about witnessing the inevitability of the lake's claim. The unknown was not simply a force. It was a predator, a judge, a collector of souls. And in the silence that followed, beneath the eternal black mist, the lake waited, watching, hungering, shaping reality for the next heartbeat, the next victim, the next soul foolish enough to confront it. The black lake had become a world without mercy. The mist, thick and writhing, obscured everything beyond a few feet, yet within its folds horrors waited, watching, breathing, alive. Mark stumbled through the suffocating fog, mud sucking at his boots, roots curling to trip him. Every whisper from the lake echoed directly into his mind. You cannot escape. You are ours. Join us beneath. The water rippled violently, unnaturally, as though it had become conscious of him, aware of every movement, every heartbeat, every faltering step. Faces emerged from the black depths, pale, drowned, skeletal, eyes hollow and infinite. Their mouths moved in silent, impossible chanting. From the mist, shadows leapt, contorted, twisted, humanoid yet monstrous, half water, half shadow, with limbs that bent impossibly. Mark's heart hammered in rhythm with the lake. Every instinct screamed to flee, but reality bent around him. Paths led back to the same black water, the shore twisted impossibly, and the fog pulsed like a living thing. The whispers escalated into a cacophony of commands, threats, and promises. The climax is here. You will fall. You are ours. Hours passed. Every moment stretched into eternity. Shapes beneath the water coalesced, rising slowly but deliberately. Pale hands reached, clawed, beckoned. The drowned whispered his secrets, sins, fears. Shadows merged with fog, forming grotesque, towering figures, leaning over him, stretching impossibly high, blocking any path of escape. Mark tried to fight, but his body felt heavy, sluggish, every motion resisted by unseen forces. The whispers now intertwined with visions. Sarah's face twisted, calling to him, then dissolving into the faces of the drowned. The lake had consumed her, and every warning from the past victims, every diary, every sketch, every tale he had ignored now manifested fully. By the second hour, the climax escalated further. The lake churned violently, fog forming into figures that shrieked and twisted, writhing in impossible contortions. The water became a black mirror of horror, reflecting shapes that were not there, mocking him, whispering threats. His mind fractured under the assault. Every sense was overloaded, the stench of decay, the piercing cold, the whispers echoing within his skull. He saw glimpses of the unknown, beings taller than trees, faces of the drowned, skeletal limbs, mist curling from water like living serpents. The whispers became chanting, a hypnotic rhythm. You belong. You cannot resist. You are ours. Each chant struck him physically, vibrating in his bones, drowning out thought, hope, resistance. By the third hour, the black lake unleashed its full horror. Water erupted, skeletal hands reaching higher, fog solidifying into shadowy humanoid forms. The drowned surrounded him, the mist wrapped around his body, the shadows pressed from all sides. Every heartbeat matched the pulse of the lake, every breath synchronized with its rhythm. The whispers became a deafening symphony, chanting, mocking, promising eternity. The climax is here, surrender, join us beneath. Mark screamed as the lake reached for him fully, tendrils of mist and shadow pulling him toward the water. The fog obscured everything, yet he felt shapes pressing against him from all directions. Impossible angles, impossible limbs, the dead and unknown converging in one terrifying entity. His vision blurred, reality fractured, and he realized resistance was futile. The lake did not just consume bodies. It consumed minds, souls, identities. The climax was absolute. There was no escape, no dawn, no rescue. Only the lake, eternal, patient, omnipotent, claiming all who dared confront it. Mark's final scream was swallowed into the mist, joining the chorus of the drowned. The whispers receded, leaving silence, but the horror remained, a promise etched into the black water, waiting for the next heartbeat, the next victim, the next soul to vanish. The black lake had reached its apex of terror, and from that night onward, nothing would ever be the same for those who had lingered too long, ignored warnings, or dared to confront the unknown. The black lake returned to its eerie calm, but calm here was a lie. The fog still clung to the surface, curling in ghostly fingers, hiding the horrors beneath. The screams, the whispers, the shadows, they had not gone. They lingered, etched into the mist, etched into the water, etched into the minds of those who had survived, or thought they had. Mark stumbled from the edge, soaked, trembling, heart hammering. Every sound seemed magnified, the creak of a branch, the ripple of the water, the faint, distant whisper of a name he did not recognize. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. The lake had claimed more than bodies, it had imprinted itself on his soul. Every thought carried its echo, you cannot escape. You belong. We watch. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time had no meaning in the lingering shadow of the lake. The fog whispered constantly, faint now, yet ever present. Shapes moved at the corner of his vision, shadows stretching impossibly, figures half buried in the mist. Mark could feel them watching, waiting, patient. The memories of Sarah's disappearance haunted him. He saw her face in every ripple, every reflection, every shadow. He remembered the whispers, the skeletal hands, the chanting that had driven him to the brink of madness. And he understood the truth. The black lake did not forget. It did not forgive. It waited for the next soul to falter, the next heartbeat to answer its call. By the second hour, the fear had become a living companion. Every sound, every movement, every shadow carried a warning. The fog seemed to pulse with life, shifting with intention. Ripples formed in the water where no wind stirred. Faces of the drowned shimmered beneath the surface, watching, accusing, beckoning. The whispers were no longer words. They were a presence, crawling inside his mind, merging with his own thoughts. Mark tried to leave, to flee, but the shore seemed endless, the mist unyielding. Paths he had taken before twisted, leading him back to the lake's edge. Every step reminded him, the black lake had marked him. Its hunger was patient, inevitable, eternal. By the third hour, the lingering fear had reached its zenith. Shadows moved with a will of their own, forming impossible shapes. The mist curled like serpents, wrapping around his legs, tugging at him. The water shimmered unnaturally, reflecting not the night sky, but visions of despair, death, and eternity. The whispers, now a deafening hum, promised the inevitable, You will join us, you cannot resist, the lake remembers. Mark fell to his knees, trembling, understanding that he had survived the confrontation only to inherit the haunting. The lake had claimed what it wanted. It had taught its lesson. And yet its presence would never leave. It lingered in the fog, in the ripples, in the shadows, in the heartbeats of all who dared approach. The night ended, or began again. It was impossible to tell. The Black Lake remained, eternal, patient, omnipotent. And somewhere, deep beneath the black water, eyes watched, waiting for the next soul to answer the call. The whispers faded but never disappeared. A promise, a threat, a lingering fear that would haunt anyone who dared think the story was over. Mark stood finally, shaking, knowing the truth. Fear was no longer external, it had become a part of him. The Black Lake had left its mark, and its whispers would echo forever. And so the terror lingered,